A little about me. I'm the rector of St. George's Anglican Church in Tunis, Tunisia. My wife and I have been serving in North Africa for 23 years. And I never thought I would say this, but some of the most exciting things happening for the kingdom in our part of the world right now are happening within the Anglican Church. The country I live in is effectively 100% Muslim, but a young, emergent community of indigenous believers is growing and reproducing, and they are increasingly choosing to be Anglican. The people I live with are mostly open-minded, and the government is tolerant, sometimes even supportive of minority religions, and specifically our work there in the country. This isn't the case with all of North Africa. Certainly it's not the case with some of our North African neighbors. About a year ago, I stood just about on this spot here, and I told you of some of my colleagues in North Africa who were arrested and put in jail for their faith. I wish that today I could tell you that our prayers have been answered and that justice reigned and that they were all released. But most of them still remain in prison. They're there on charges of apostasy, and frankly, many of them are under the threat of execution. And I tell you this so that you can continue to pray, but also so that you'll know that being a prisoner for the faith is not just something that happened one day in the past, not just something that we read about in the Bible or maybe church history. It's not just something happened at the time of the Apostle Paul, but that it continues to this day. In our reading in Ephesians this morning, Paul is reminding the people in the early church that he was a prisoner for them. And we know that this is the case. He was writing this letter to the Ephesians from a prison in Rome. And zooming out for a second, this letter to the Ephesian church was it was in Asia Minor. It was a growing church, becoming a strong movement. It was a relatively new church, but we know just some 30, 40 years later by some letters from a Roman official called Pliny that the Christian church in Asia Minor was so common and big and growing and prolific that the temples were empty. And this was a big crisis for the authorities. So this emerging church in Ephesus was huge. It was very important. And Paul loved it and he cared for it greatly. And he was in the previous chapter talking about how there was this hostility between Jews and Gentiles. But suggesting that it wasn't simply hostility between Jews and Gentiles, but rather it was a universal hostility that exists within the human race, that there's this human tendency that keeps us in our clans and causes hostility between clans. But Paul was making the point that in Jesus, this hostility is abolished because together we're all grafted into a new nation and we're adopted into a new family. All is one. So all hostilities are abolished. And then immediately after this point, Paul starts in chapter 3, and he says, "For this reason, I, Paul, who am a prisoner for the Gentiles," and then he takes a detour. This first 13 verses of chapter 3, the whole thing is a detour. It's a long parenthetical aside. And part of the reason we know that this is just a detour and an aside is because he gets back to it in verse 14. He gets back on track and he says, oh yeah, right, for this reason, he repeats it. Oh yeah, for this reason, since you're all a part of this new family, I'm gonna pray for you. And that's what he wanted to say when he started what we now call chapter 3. But he takes this long 13-verse detour. And because it's a detour, because it's sort of a parenthetical aside, it gets overlooked sometimes. But we should never overlook these 13 verses. They're so interesting. So here's what he says in this detour, that he goes off on a rabbit trail right before he says, oh yeah, let me pray for you guys who are now a part of the same family. He says, I'm so confident that this grace is for you Gentiles that I'm happy to go to prison for it. And he talks then about this mystery of revelation, that there's some big mystery that's been revealed. And then he says that the church is going to be a witness, so much that it's even going to be a witness to the angels and the demons, and it'll affect them, our witness. And then he says, and so for all these reasons, when you suffer like I am now in prison, there's no reason to lose heart. There's a few things that we need to look at in detail in this passage. And the first is something that we see all the time throughout the Bible, and this discussion of the word Gentiles. Now, on one level, it means the same thing in the New Testament that it does today, which is anyone who is not a Jew. But it was way more complicated than that, and I don't think that we could fully understand what it meant because the way a first century Jew in Palestine looked at the world was so different. And this idea of Gentiles, it wasn't just someone who's not me. It was a way of looking at the entire rest of the world. In fact, the word that is used in Greek is not some form of the Hebrew word Goya, but it's the word ethne, or sometimes ethnon, depending on the case and use, but it basically means nations. And sometimes in the New Testament, this word ethne is translated nations. Sometimes it's translated Gentiles. But the interesting thing is that what this is talking about is all of those groups out in the world. It's a way of looking out in the world, whether they're part of us or not, whether I'm a part of one or not, it's kind of insignificant. Anytime you see the word Gentile or nation in the Bible, you should be thinking about the vast diversity of people groups that exist throughout the world. I would suggest that anytime you read the Bible and you see the word Gentile or ethne, that in your mind you replace it with the term ethno-linguistic people group. This is a term that anthropologists use, and it's the most accurate translation of that word, ethne, ethno-linguistic people group. It basically means some group of people that is unique, that has an identity to themselves that's different from the rest of the world. And every time Paul or one of the New Testament writers or anywhere in the Bible is concerned with Gentiles or the nations, the idea is that it's discussing this idea that there are multiple ethno-linguistic people groups in the world, and God is concerned with every single one of them. Not all of them as a swath, but each one of them individually. So I might challenge you in the future when you're reading the Bible. Replace in your mind the word Gentile or nation with ethno-linguistic people group. You know, this idea of nation, if we see it, we're going to think country. You know, this idea of a nation state or a country is relatively new. It's only a couple hundred years old, really. And there are 190 or so countries that are identified by the UN, but there've been identified by anthropologists some 12,000 ethno-linguistic people groups throughout the world. And these ethno-linguistic people groups are the ones that God is concerned about. And Paul is excited that they've been grafted into the family of God. Paul is so eager to share with each one of these ethno-linguistic people groups what Jesus had done for them, that he's happy to go to prison for them. And then he mentions this idea of a mystery. And the mention of a mystery is really a mystery. But it's actually a big theme in Paul's writings. Now, when we think of mystery today, we might think of like a mystery novel or something, and the idea is that it's something hidden that needs to be figured out. But that wasn't really the understanding of a mystery in the Greek world. There was this concept of mystery, particularly in religious circles, where mystery was a way to make religion seem important because somebody had knowledge that other people didn't have. And so Paul used this word mystery a lot, and I think the reason he used it is because he was contextualizing. That means he's putting a truth of the gospel in terms that people will understand. And not just that people will understand, but that maybe people will recognize as good news. From their own culture, from their own experience, they're like, oh, I can relate to this word mystery. And this, of course, resonates with me because as a cross-cultural worker, contextualization is a big part of what we do. We have to contextualize our message, our church, our worship, our prayer, everything. And sometimes our contextualization is something as superficial as what we wear or the music that we use or maybe, what we use for a communion vessel. But sometimes and often contextualization is about way more substantial stuff, like the meaning of the word Christian, or how people conceive of the concept Son of God. Contextualization is an everyday thing for people like me who are cross-cultural workers. And I think that's what Paul was doing here. He's contextualizing, knowing that in the Greek world, people love this idea of mystery. And so he was tapping into that, saying, there's mystery. And of course, in that part of Asia Minor, there were these mystery cults of Demeter and Dionysus, and they were super popular. And there was this idea that they've got some knowledge that's hidden. It's this hidden truth, and people want it. And only initiates are allowed to grab this truth. And this is why this idea of mystery was so popular. And so Paul is contextualizing by talking about a mystery so often. But Paul's mystery is different. And what he's saying is that there's this mystery that's been hidden because of the blindness of men, but now it's been made known. And that's what Paul means by mystery. Not that there's something you guys got to figure out, put on your thinking caps, go into one of those rooms where you have to try to figure out how to escape, the escape rooms. It's not like that. And it's not like, there's a mystery that only certain people are going to get to know, and so come and join the club and give enough money. It's not a mystery like that. It's a mystery as if there's this thing that was hidden. And it wasn't deliberately hidden. It was men's blindness that was causing it to be hidden, but now it's been made known. And he tells us in this parenthetical aside in chapter 3 exactly what this mystery is. And anytime you see Paul talk about mystery, you can come back to this parenthetical aside in chapter 3 to know exactly what he's talking about. And he is saying that this mystery is that the Gentiles are fellow heirs and members of the same body. The mystery is that every ethno-linguistic people group have the ability to benefit from everything that the people of God have been able to benefit from. That's the mystery, and it had been hidden, but now it's been made known. So we've got this idea of Gentiles, of ethno-linguistic people groups, and this mystery that these ethno-linguistic people groups have been included all along, but we just didn't know it. And now that's been made known. But then he drops a bomb. In verse 10, he says that so that through the church, the manifold wisdom of God might now be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. I'm just going to read this again slowly. So that through the church, the manifold wisdom of God might now be made known to the rulers and authorities in heavenly places. And the most significant thing about this is hidden behind this unfortunate translation of the word manifold. It gets across the point well enough. But the word that Paul himself uses is polypoikilos. And the word poikilos means multicolored. And of course, you're all probably familiar with the prefix poly, which means many. And he's talking about the multicolored wisdom of God. The multicolored wisdom of God somehow manifests in the church. But see, the thing is that Paul doesn't think that that word is good enough. He doesn't think that saying multicolored is strong enough, that it works well enough. So he adds poly in there. So he's not just saying multicolored, he says many multicolored. The many multicolored wisdom of God is manifest in the church. And as far as we know, Paul invented this word. It never existed. We've never seen it as far as anybody can tell in any Greek writing. Paul invented this word, polypoikilos, because multicolored wasn't enough, and he had to say, no, it's many multicolored. The many multicolored wisdom of God. Multicolored wisdom of God doesn't do it justice. I've got to create a new word to do it justice. And he's talking about all of the ethno-linguistic people groups in the world, that each one brings their own thing to the expression to the gospel. Each one brings their own thing to the church. And it's so beautiful that it represents a many multicolored wisdom. So, in Paul's parenthetical aside, in his detour, he tells us that all the ethno-linguistic people groups in the world are a part of God's plan, and every single one of them is worthy of God's grace. And that it's not just something new, but this mystery has always been there. It's always been there, even in the writings of the Old Testament. If you go back to the story of the Tower of Babel, or to Genesis 12, when God blesses Abraham, or throughout the prophets, like when Isaiah in 49:6 says, I will also make you a light for the Gentiles, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth. Throughout the Old Testament, you find these constant references to God's passion for the ethno-linguistic people groups, every single one of them, and the many multicolored wisdom of God that'll one day become a part of the church. And that this church will be a paragon of many multicolored beauty and wisdom through its diversity and its richness and inclusiveness of every culture and language and people. So what does this mean for us? How do we take this 13-verse detour and translate it into something for our lives? Well, first of all, it means that we should participate in those things that God is so passionate about. And that we should care for those unreached people groups that are outside the reach of the church as much as the Bible does. And that we can give financially to many multicolored expressions of the gospel, so that every ethno-linguistic people group is included in the kingdom. And we can pray fervently for a many multicolored expression of the church that is such a witness that the spiritual powers and principalities are shaken. We can make sure our church becomes a place of a many multicolored expression itself, reaching out to those who are different and those who are disenfranchised, and partnering with those who are embedded among the unreached out there in the world. And every follower of Christ and every student of the Bible should be tapped into the many multicolored wisdom of the church, whose beauty exists in its diversity and inclusivity, and whose passion is for all those ethno-linguistic people groups who have not yet taken their place at the banquet with us. Amen.